All right, so we've got a really interesting set of articles here, all about hacking and jamming.
Yeah.
Um, and, it seems like you're interested in how governments and others have tried to control information,
hmm
even going back over 100 years.
Yeah. For this deep dive, we're going all the way back to 1903 to the very first documented hacking event.
1903.
Yeah.
Wow, that's before computers.
Right.
The internet, like all of that. We're
Absolutely.
talking about the era of Guglielmo Marconi
Mhm.
and his pioneering work with wireless telegraphy.
Yeah, Marconi was really revolutionizing communication at the time, sending messages across vast distances without wires.
Right.
And he was very confident in the security of his system.
Oh, yeah. He claimed it was practically impossible to intercept.
Right. He did.
But it sounds like there was someone who wasn't so convinced.
That's right.
A British magician and inventor named Nevil Maskelyne.
Yes, Nevil Maskelyne. And what's interesting is that he actually worked for a rival company.
Oh, really? The Anglo-American Telegraph Company, so his skepticism of Marconi's claims, might have been fueled by a little professional rivalry,
Yeah.
as well as a genuine interest in pushing the boundaries of what was possible with wireless technology.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's June 4th, 1903, at the Royal Institution in London.
Okay.
And Marconi's collaborator, John Ambrose Fleming, is giving a demonstration of the wireless telegraph to a very distinguished audience.
Right. Hundreds of miles away in Cornwall, Marconi himself is ready to transmit messages to Fleming's receiver.
Yeah, it's a big moment,
It is.
meant to really showcase this incredible potential of wireless communication.
Absolutely.
But here's where things take a turn.
Okay.
Instead of Marconi's message appearing on the receiver, the audience is met with the word rats, repeatedly spelled out in Morse code.
Yeah, and to make matters even more embarrassing, a mocking limerick about Marconi followed.
Oh, no.
So clearly someone was deliberately interfering with the demonstration.
Well, that someone was
Nevil Maskelyne.
Maskelyne. Yeah, he had set up a transmitter nearby
Wow.
and essentially hijacked Marconi's signal.
He, hacked it.
He did in a very public and I'd say cheeky way.
So this act, while seemingly just a prank, had much deeper implications.
It did.
It's considered the first documented hack.
That's right.
Maskelyne gained unauthorized access to Marconi's system, exposed its flaws, and demonstrated that wireless communication was not as secure as everyone thought.
And what's really interesting is that this incident, I think, really highlights the fact that any advancement in technology while bringing progress also opens up new possibilities.
For good and bad.
Exactly. And, with technology evolving at an ever-increasing pace, this kind of cat and mouse game just gets more complex.
So are we saying that what Maskelyne did was basically a very early form of jamming?
Absolutely. He intentionally interfered with a wireless transmission that's jamming, plain and simple. And just like we see today, his motives were likely a mix of exposing those security flaws and maybe a dash of mischief and competition.
So this magician, trying to debunk Marconi's claims, accidentally becomes the first person in history to jam a signal. That's incredible.
Yeah.
But how does this very early incident relate to the kind of jamming we see in the modern world?
Well, fast forward to today, and jamming is unfortunately still a very real issue. Authoritarian governments use it to censor information and control what their citizens can access, especially through radio and satellite broadcasts.
You're talking about things like shortwave radio, which is still used in many parts of the world to broadcast news and information, and satellite TV, which people rely on for entertainment and staying up to date.
Exactly. Those are prime targets for jamming because they reach a wide audience and are often harder to control than internet-based information. By blocking those signals, governments can essentially create an information blackout, stopping people from getting alternative viewpoints or news that might challenge their authority.
It's almost like turning back the clock to a time before these technologies existed.
Isolating
People and limiting their access to the outside world.
That's a great way to put it. And while the technology has evolved significantly since Maskelyne's time, the underlying goal is still the same: to control the flow of information and shape the narrative.
It's fascinating and a little unsettling to see how this concept has persisted over time. From a magician's prank to a tool of censorship and information control in the modern world.
It really is. And as we dig deeper into this, we'll explore the various methods of jamming used today, the motivations behind them, and what it all means for freedom of information in our increasingly interconnected world.
So from a 1903 magic trick to modern-day information warfare, it seems we have a lot of ground to cover.
We do. It's pretty amazing, right? Even though it happened over a century ago,
Yeah.
that Marconi incident really highlights a crucial point.
What's that?
That any advancement in technology, while it often brings amazing progress,
Right.
it also opens up new possibilities for both good and bad.
Yeah, it's like a constant race, isn't it? Security experts trying to stay one step ahead of those who are looking for ways to
Exploit weaknesses.
exploit those weaknesses.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And with technology evolving faster and faster,
Right.
this race just gets more and more complex and challenging.
Yeah.
Like Maskelyne's setup was pretty basic, but modern jamming technology can be incredibly sophisticated.
And it's especially worrying how this technology is being used to suppress information and control the narrative, especially by these authoritarian governments.
Yeah.
We touched on shortwave and satellite broadcasts.
Right.
But can you give us some specific examples of how jamming is being used for censorship today?
Sure. So there are, unfortunately, plenty of examples.
Like?
Take Ethiopia. They've been accused of jamming broadcasts from international news organizations.
Like who?
Like the BBC Deutsche Welle.
Okay.
And the Voice of America.
Right.
Particularly during times of political unrest.
Yeah.
It's a way for them to control the flow of information
Right.
and prevent citizens from getting news from independent sources.
So it's not just about blocking entertainment.
No.
It's about preventing people from accessing news and information.
Yes.
That might challenge the government's perspective.
Exactly. And it's not just limited to Ethiopia either.
Really?
China has a long history of jamming, especially targeting broadcasters like Voice of America and Radio Free Asia.
What do?
They provide news and information that the Chinese government wants to suppress.
Oh, I see.
These organizations often broadcast on shortwave radio,
Okay.
which can reach remote areas and bypass internet censorship. So that makes it a key target for jamming.
It's a stark reminder that even in our so-called information age, access to unbiased news and diverse viewpoints is not a given.
It's not.
Yeah, it's something that needs to be constantly protected and fought for.
Absolutely. And the methods of jamming have become increasingly advanced, making this fight even more challenging.
Like what? What are we seeing?
We're seeing techniques that can target specific frequencies.
Wow.
And even individual data packets, making it harder to detect and counter.
So it's like
It's a cat and mouse game with, those trying to jam signals, constantly developing new tactics, and then those trying to protect the flow of information, having to adapt and develop countermeasures.
Exactly.
It's a technological arms race, and the stakes are incredibly high. The ability to control information is a very powerful tool, and those who wield it can exert significant influence over entire populations.
Okay, so we've talked about how and why jamming is used.
Right.
But let's get a bit more technical here.
Okay.
How exactly does jamming work? Like, what kind of technology are we talking about?
So jamming techniques have evolved a lot since Maskelyne's time.
Yeah.
The simplest form is what we call brute force jamming.
Okay.
And it basically involves just flooding a frequency with noise, making it impossible to receive the intended signal.
So, imagine turning up the static on your radio.
Exactly.
So loud you can't hear the music or the news?
Right.
So it's like creating a wall of noise.
Yes.
That drowns out everything else. That seems pretty crude.
It is.
But I guess it can be effective.
It can be, especially against older or simpler receivers.
Okay.
But there are more sophisticated techniques as well.
Like what?
Like spoofing.
Okay.
Involves creating fake signals that mimic the real ones.
Oh, wow.
Tricking the receiver into locking onto the wrong signal.
So you're not just overwhelming the signal with noise.
Yeah.
You're actually creating a false signal.
That's right.
That looks legitimate.
Right.
Fooling the receiver into thinking it's the real thing.
Exactly. And this can be particularly effective against satellite broadcasts.
Okay.
Which often rely on specific codes and frequencies to identify and decode signals.
That's incredible. And a little frightening to think that someone could essentially hijack a satellite signal and replace it with their own content.
And then there's adaptive jamming.
Okay.
Uses sophisticated algorithms to analyze the target signal.
And create jamming signals that are specifically tailored to disrupt it.
So it's like a smart weapon.
It is.
That adjusts its attack based on the target's defenses.
Precisely. And this constant evolution of jamming techniques is what makes it such a challenging problem to address.
Right.
It's an ongoing arms race between those who want to control information and those who are fighting to keep it flowing freely.
It's a sobering thought, and it makes me wonder what can be done to counter these increasingly sophisticated jamming techniques.
Well, there are a number of strategies being employed, and we'll dive into those right after we
Oh,
get
back.
to it.
So before we were talking about some pretty advanced jamming techniques.
We were.
It's clear that those trying to control information are getting good at what they do.
Yeah, they are.
But what about the other side? What are researchers and engineers doing to counter these tactics and protect that free flow of information?
Well, it's important to understand that countering jamming isn't a simple task.
Right.
It's a constant game of innovation,
Yeah.
with both sides trying to outmaneuver each other.
Right.
But there are some promising strategies and technologies being developed.
Give us some hope here. What are some of the approaches being used?
Well, one approach is to use what's called frequency hopping spread spectrum technology.
Okay.
Essentially, the transmitter rapidly changes frequencies,
Okay.
making it much harder for the jammer to lock on and maintain a consistent block.
So instead of broadcasting on a single frequency,
Right.
which makes it easy to target the signal constantly jumping around,
Exactly.
making it harder for the jammer to keep up.
Yeah, like trying to hit a moving target.
Right.
That's a good way to put it.
Clever.
Another method is to use directional antennas,
Okay.
which focus the signal in a specific direction,
Okay.
reducing the impact of jamming coming from other directions.
So it's like creating a laser beam
Yeah,
of information aimed directly at the intended audience.
right. And this is particularly useful
Yeah.
in situations where, the general location of the jammer.
Oh, okay. I
Yeah.
see. And there are also techniques being developed
Mhm.
that use sophisticated signal processing
Okay.
to identify and filter out jamming signals.
Kind of like noise-canceling headphones, but for radio waves.
Exactly.
Wow, that's some next-level stuff. It seems like there's a lot of effort going into, developing these countermeasures.
There is.
But how effective are they in real-world situations?
Well, it's a constant back and forth.
Yeah.
As jamming techniques become more sophisticated,
Right.
so do the countermeasures. It's an ongoing arms race. And, it's important to remember that jamming is just one tactic
Yeah.
in the broader battle for information control.
What do you mean by that?
Well, even if jamming is successfully countered,
Right.
there are other ways to manipulate information and influence public opinion.
Like what?
Propaganda disinformation campaigns,
Oh.
internet censorship. These are all tools that can be used to control the narrative.
So it's not just about keeping the signals clear. It's also about being critical of the information we receive.
Yes,
And seeking out diverse perspectives
absolutely.
to make sure we're getting a balanced view of the world.
You got it.
It's a bit daunting, to be honest, knowing that there are so many forces at play
Yes.
trying to shape our understanding of the world. What can everyday people do to stay informed and protect themselves from these information control tactics?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
First and foremost, be aware that these tactics exist.
Okay.
Be critical of the information you consume.
Right.
Don't just accept things at face value.
Uh-huh.
Ask questions. Seek out multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
And consider the source.
Okay.
Support organizations that are fighting for freedom of information and promoting media literacy.
So it's about being proactive,
Yes,
taking responsibility for our own information intake.
absolutely.
It's not just about relying on technology to protect us, but also about developing our own critical thinking skills.
Exactly.
Right.
And remember, the quest for knowledge and truth is an ongoing journey.
Right.
Hmm.
There will always be those who seek to control information and manipulate the narrative, but by staying informed, being critical,
Yeah.
engaging in open dialogue,
Yeah.
we can help ensure that truth and freedom of information prevail.
Well said. It's a powerful reminder that we all have a role to play in safeguarding that free flow of information and making sure that diverse voices and perspectives can be heard. And on that note,
Yeah.
I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of hacking and jamming.
We have.
We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. Remember, knowledge is power, and being aware of these issues is the first step in protecting ourselves from manipulation and making sure that we remain informed and engaged citizens.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Until next time, stay curious,